known for their work in the 90s on the Quest for Glory series. They are right now working on a Kickstarter for Hero U, Road to Redemption. And just to be on the record here for everyone, I backed Hero U back in 2012 when it was on Kickstarter. And I'd like to say thank you to Corey and Lori for being here and talking with us today.
We're very glad to be here.
So can you tell us
a bit about your...
Oh, sorry, Lori.
No problem. Go for it.
So I was going to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about what Hero U is for people who haven't seen the Kickstarter page yet?
Yeah. Hero U Road to Redemption is the first of a planned series of games. We have in mind 5 games, but it might be shorter or longer depending on how things go. But our Quest for Glory series that we did in the 1990s was a best-selling, award-winning adventure role-playing hybrid series that we invented. Won Adventure Game of the Year in Computer Gaming World and some other awards. And we're trying to get the same aesthetic to a new game. The idea of well, actually, let me step back a step from there and say that Lori and I met playing Dungeons and Dragons back in several years ago, and we decided that when we came to computer games, that computer games at the time were all lacking. Adventure games didn't have the excitement of the role-playing games with the combat and so on, and the role-playing games didn't have the story and the characterization that that adventure games managed. So we coming from a tabletop role-playing background, said we want to have it all, and that was why we came up with our Quest for Glory series, where we basically took Sierra's adventure game engine and added to it combat and some really exciting stats, and some role-playing game type things. So we're doing the same type of game again with Hero U. The difference here is that in Quest for Glory you had an unnamed hero that went around, and the player got to decide at the beginning, is it a magic user or a warrior or a thief, and then the game had to support all of those and had puzzles that changed according to which class you were. We decided to drill down one level, and each game in the Hero U series focuses around a different particular character. So the first one is called Rogue to Redemption. It's a play on Road to Redemption, and features Sean O'Connor, who is a thief trying to become a heroic rogue. And that way we can tailor the entire storyline around his backstory. We know where he came from, the player doesn't, and we'll discover it during the course of it. Sean himself doesn't know where, all the story of where he came from, so it's a kind of a mystery story like that. But we have combat. This time we're doing turn-based combat. We decided that, we got some comments from adventure gamers that said they didn't want any kind of twitch play or anything requiring reflexes, so we've gone entirely turn-based. You get to really think about, your strategy and tactics in the combat. You can also avoid most of the combat by sneaking past it and so on. So Hero U is on Kickstarter. We're using the Unity engine. We're doing 3D, but we're using the technique called isometric, so we don't have true perspective. And it's kind of a stylized graphical approach. We have some really beautiful artwork and characters. We're also doing a lot of beautiful paintings for backgrounds, and I'm talking too long. What do you want to say, Lori?
Background with a lot of combat, different creatures, a lot of exploration, and a lot of character development, so that your character progresses in all sorts of different ways. And there's all sorts of different activities or things to do all the time to improve yourself, to get better at the character, to make Sean more exciting to play. And when we went into the combat aspect of that, we wanted to do this not as a adult turn-based game. We wanted it to be a puzzle-solving, problem-solving thing more than a twitch fighting game, so that we have a lot of different variety of techniques and items that you can use in combat, so you can think your way around monsters rather than just simply press a button and fight. So it's all about having the player feel like it's a way of dealing with the problem and trying to get these monsters down using tools and using brains rather than your stabby parts.
That sounds pretty interesting, and you see a lot of games, sometimes they attempt to combine the two, or elements of the two, but they don't necessarily always do so well. In combat in particular, just until recently, we were seeing the death of turn-based combat in many cases. So
yeah, to us, the difference between an adventure game and a role-playing game is an adventure game has puzzles, which means the designer has come up with something tricky and tries to trick the player and make it difficult for them to solve the puzzle. Role-playing games have problems. So you have something like, a monster that's between you and the treasure, and we don't tell you how to solve it, and in fact, we don't come up with a solution. We give you tools. There are things like traps and weapons and potions and so on, and how you use the tools is up to the player. So you might decide you want to conserve your flaming Molotov cocktail for the really tough monsters, in which case you might have a tougher time fighting the easier ones, and so on. I also wanted to say, Laurie touched on the conversation in the game, and that's really a critical part in this. A big part of this game is talking to the other characters, and it's a very heavily text-based game. We have very nice graphics, but it's really all about looking at things, interacting with objects, and mostly talking with the other characters. So you get pieces of the story revealed from that. You get clues of what to do. And you also affect your relationship with them. As you talk to people, they may like you better or less, and that affects what will happen later in the game.
And you've got a thing like how Sean behaves in the game is entirely up to the player. So you'll always have a choice of how you want to sound to other characters, whether you want to sound friendly and use your charm to be a friend or to get them to do things, or you can be a smart aleck and say, snarky things the whole game, and how you say things and what you say to them will affect how they like you in the game, and that affects what kind of quests they're willing to give you or what kind of a relationship you're going to have with them, because it really isn't this, will you do me a favor kind of game. It's, these are my problems. Are you going to help me solve them, or are you going to just do something else in the game? It's all a matter of choices, and nothing in this game is really mandatory for the most part. You go through and choose what you want to do and who you want to behave, who you want to act with, and who you want for a friend, and that's what creates the game.
And the choices are all tied into the skill system. So let's say you decide to use your smarts, since it's a rogue, instead of calling it intelligence, we call it smarts. So you might choose the smart solution to a puzzle, and by doing that, we check whether you succeed, and that's based on, how high is your smarts rating. And then as you do it, because you're using your smarts, that gives you a chance of improving that skill. If you instead decide to use your moxie or your charm, those would be the skill checks we make. So your skills are very, very relevant, even to the adventuring part of the game, not just to the combat part.
With that type of skill system, how do you make sure that it doesn't end up overly increasing, as we've seen in some more open world games that have taken some of that ideas from Quest for Glory, that given that it's easy for players to just spam it out at times. You've mentioned that time is something you're wanting to use a lot, so I imagine you're wanting to focus on opportunity cost to help manage that part. So if somebody wants to train one skill, they can't train another.
Yeah, we went into the concept of economics early in the game design, and we have multiple economies of this game. One of them, of course, is cash. Sean starts out dirt poor and has to find a way to make enough money to buy the tools he needs to improve and to pass his classes. We have time as an economy. Every action you take, it's a little like the old tech space Infocom games, in that every action you take uses a certain number of minutes. And so if you sit there fooling around and doing too many actions, you're going to find the afternoon's passed and you won't be able to do anything else. We have, of course, the player's health as an economy. We have the stat system. So all of these things are supposed to be balanced, and we have them working at different rates. For example, at the beginning of the game, your money and your skills are very low, and you'll be building those up steadily during the game. Your money will be going up and down as you buy things. Time is, on a pretty fixed time scale. So each of these economies, we've kind of plotted out a curve for each one and figured out, throughout the course of the game, some go up, some go down, and that you'll be emphasizing some of them more at the beginning of the game and some more at the end. Whether we actually pull this off or not is, as you say, very, very difficult. And that's one of the reasons that even though we expect to complete the game by the end of this year, that I've listed, I think, March 2016 as the release date, because we think this game will need at least 3 months of play testing and refinement to try and get those economies balanced. It is extremely difficult, and we'll find out how well we pull it off.
Yes, well, we have an advantage. We have, because of Kickstarter, a huge fan base and a huge group of beta testers and people that want to play this game, that we will be able to have them test out things and be able to specifically look at the problems that we have, things like whether the progression works well, whether it feels like it's fun, whether it feels too slow, all of those things that are guesswork on our part of thinking, yeah, I think this works. Now we'll be able to have people actually give us feedback and be able to actually see whether it feels right, because it all comes down to is it fun?
Yeah, you've also mentioned in one document there, you mentioned your relationships as another currency. How, I assume that's based on the dialogue system, and possibly maybe if you're asking someone to do something, that would be having that go down if they're working with you. How do you plan on implementing that?
Well, in this case, you're in a school, and every day is a school day in the school. So therefore, after class, you have a chance to interact with different characters, talk to them and that. And again, it's, well, am I going to spend my afternoon trying to make some more money so that I can buy things, or am I going to spend my afternoon hanging out with other people, talking to them and getting to know them better? And when you get to know people, that's when they tell you, oh, I'm doing this, or I'm trying to do this, or I have problems with this. And when you help them solve their problems, you start to create a friendship. And eventually, in a lot of cases, you can have a romance with those characters if you keep going along those lines. But again, there's 7 characters in this game that you can have a real relationship with, and that takes time. So you can't do everything and play the game and get it all. So it's a game designed to do multiple times, to play through, to find the different paths through it, and so that you can really just keep playing this game again and again and have it be a totally different experience for you.
And it isn't just conversation. That's a big part of it. But we also have what you do and say in class is noticed by other people. So if you answer one of the teacher's questions in a particularly snarky way, that may favorably impress some of your classmates, and other ones will be kind of like, oh, what an idiot. And that affects it. Also, everybody has certain things that they like as gifts, and you can find bottles of wine and other things through it that each character has particular things that they like. So if you offer a gift to someone, that will improve your relationship. In order to even do that, you have to have a certain amount of relationship to start with. So they will not just accept a gift from you if they hate you. So we've got all those things gathered together, and of course, many of the gifts you can give, you could instead be turning in and selling for money. So by giving it as a gift to someone, you're depriving yourself of cash. So all those factors come into play. Also, even when you're talking to one character, if there are other characters in the room, they're listening. They hear what you say, and that can affect their attitude towards you. So it's very, very complex, and Lori is working with this tangled web of massive numbers of flags and conditions and what day of the school semester it is, and all these things come into account in deciding what dialogue lines are available, what options you have, and how they affect people.
In some ways, this game is like the old Lara Croft which was it, Lorabo?
Lorabo.
Lorabo mystery things where you're wandering this castle and there are places where people are and you can sneak up and listen in on other people's conversations. You get to unravel what's going on with other characters just by listening to them, even though you're not interacting with them. And you can find a lot of things that are going on in this huge castle that is also, once upon a time, was owned by a group of people out to save the world called the Illuminati. And the whole castle was overrun by betrayal and that. And so on one level, you're a student at a school and doing all sorts of student-y things, and on another level you get to go down into the dungeons underneath and discover more and more about the history of the past of this castle and how it is going to affect the future.
Yeah, so are several different intertwined mystery stories in this game. One of them is that Sean's father has been missing since he was a very young child, and he has no idea. Sean has no idea what happened to him. But some other people at the school do. And so he will gradually be getting clues to that mystery as the game goes along. So that's kind of a personal family level. Then on the higher level, the whole Illuminati backstory, this castle itself holds mysteries that go back hundreds of years. There's kind of a Dark Ones mythology behind that, and you'll be finding out more of that. Just things happen. Other students get in trouble. We mentioned the time thing that, we're used to in the typical role-playing game that for some reason you've got, the king, with all the resources of the kingdom at his command, has chosen one peasant off the street and said, okay, you're my hero now, and you get to do everything in this kingdom, and nothing anybody else does matters. Well, that doesn't happen in Hero U. In Hero U, all of your other classmates are striving against you. They're all working to become Rogue of the Year, among other things, and they're all independent entities. If you sit around and decide that you're not going to solve the problems right away, the problems don't sit there and wait for you. Somebody else is going to go out there and be the hero. And that means you get to go to class and listen while everybody applauds the other student who did the work you could have done. So it's always a question of you don't have to be a hero, but you have to decide what your priorities are. And we're trying to set this up. It's really hard, but we're trying to set it up so that if you choose to not be a hero at all, that you can go through and do things, try to accumulate money. You can try to get other students in trouble, and eventually maybe join the Thieves Guild that was recruiting you at the very beginning of the story. I don't know how well that'll play out, but it's definitely something that we want to try to really give the player agency and choose what they want to do.
Likewise with things like combat. Most of the combat in this game is avoidable. For those people that really like adventure games and really don't like playing the RPG game, then you do not need to fight most monsters. In fact, most of the combat is totally avoidable, or there's a way to solve the problem without fighting. So there are major monsters in this game. You just don't always have to physically fight them.
You mentioned, actually, I believe I noticed this as I was going through some of the stuff. At one point that, Lori, you had a solution about some sort of slider there for a game style, about how much combat and how much RPG they want to be. Is that still in the plans for the game, or has that been said that it's not going to work in our current vision for the game?
Actually, what we decided is to take it away from the artificiality of setting a slider or setting a game mechanic, and to let the player decide by the way the actions that he takes in the game. So likewise, again to the role-playing aspects, if you're not a big monster fighter, you get that sneak skill and you have sleeping powder and things like that to get around, and you can avoid most of that combat while still exploring the really dangerous areas of the game. But then again, there are some things, some monsters like the undead, that you can't use those tricks on. You have to find different techniques to get around them, or you have to avoid them. So therefore, it isn't a matter of having some artificial thing at the beginning of the game saying, oh, I don't think I want to do RP today. You'll figure out as you play it whether you're enjoying some aspect or not, and you'll be able to take the path that you really want just by your actions.
And that's really, in a lot of ways, the most empowering type of player agency that there is, that you can choose how do you play the game, not just, a few lines at times. But speaking of storytelling and art and pen and paper role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, I have a background there myself as well. Not all the tropes and tools that one's used for telling stories in those necessarily convert that well to video games, especially ones that you plan on people replaying. A player may never know if a choice in a role-playing game is a false choice or if it's only an illusion of choice. How do you convert on those types of things, and what type of tools do you use that are specific to games that don't necessarily come over from that tabletop and wouldn't necessarily convert the other way as well?
Well, one of the real tropes that adventure games came up with early on was the idea of puzzle points or adventure points or what skill things, and the score. It is the way of keeping score. And in our game, we will be recording every, a puzzle you've effectively solved in it, and at the end of the game you'll get to see the list, but then you can also see the list of the paths not taken and all the other things you didn't do, like you could have saved this person if you'd done this, and it gives you the hint once you're done of all the other paths that are there hiding underneath. And oh, you could have made friends with this person, and this is a different path that you could have taken. So we will let the player be able to figure it out, and most people will wind up with the hint books, which are going to give you all sorts of oh, there's alternate paths to this, or you can also do this, so that we'll let the player know. But it isn't a matter of doing all those things. You have to do all those things to make the game fun. It's like, there's so much to do, and if you get only 1% of the game, it's still a game that you own, and you can go back and replay it and find out the other things that you didn't get. And so it doesn't end with one sitting.
Well, I was just going to say the big difference between a computer role-playing game and a live tabletop game is that in the live game you have the imagination of all the players and the game master coming into play, and you can find solutions that the game master never really imagined originally, and sometimes drive it down a different path. In practice, most of the live games we've been in really don't do that all that well anyway. Most of the live DMs work from published game books that have already listed a few solutions and get kind of lost when the players get too far off the beaten track. So compared to a really spectacularly good think on their feet game master, the computer games will never be quite as good. What the strength of the online, of the computer game is that we have incredible graphics, professional artists painting these really nice scenes that help you visualize, and we get to actually take our time to craft the text. I don't want to tell you how long Laurie will agonize over one line of dialogue, or or 1 day's worth of dialogue with one character. It's really time-consuming. It's really complex, but as a result, it's better than what we would come up with doing it live. So within the constraints of what we've put into the story, we try to tell it really, really well. But obviously, there isn't the flexibility you have in a live game.
One of the things we've done with this game is we've created a game tool underneath for doing things like dialogue and that. And it's very flexible, and it's something that it doesn't all have to be done at the same time. So therefore, when I create a dialogue for a character and he's giving information about something else, when I get to another place in the game and say, oh, I wish I had given them the hint about this, I don't have to wish. I can go back to the other character and say, oh, and add that he just happens to mention this other clue. So the script becomes very fluid, and things in the future can be foreshadowed in the past. And I don't have to think of this all at once at the beginning of the game. I can readapt and readjust things so that it balances out later.
So I believe that the tool is called Composer. You had one of your people design it early on in the process before they had to leave, as a lot of the people on your project have had to over the times. Has it helped you a lot? It's helped you a lot with working with Unity?
Not so much working with Unity, but the ability to have complex interactions in which I have messages that are triggered because a player has done several different things, and then it only comes up in that circumstance. And when you're trying to do that in a traditional script, i.e. telling your poor programmer, well, if this happens and this over here happens and and this thing here happens, then this happens, the communication is very difficult, and it's even more difficult when you have several different programmers working on it all at the same time, and they're trying to communicate between each other to get that. So in our case, we do it.
Unity is the equivalent of the let's look back at the tools we had when we were at Sierra. The SCI language that we used was actually written in a combination of C and assembly language. It was about 1/3 machine language, and that was actually why I was originally brought into Sierra, is because I was an experienced machine language programmer. So it would be absolutely impossible to script a game in that. You would be, down there. You're dealing with bits and bytes and how to get things on the screen and stuff. Very, very primitive level. So Sierra created the SCI language, which was a layer, which was written in, as I said, C and assembly. There was a layer on top of that, and it was a scripting language that was designed specifically for writing adventure games. You could make high-level commands, like you could say, Aeolus, walk from this point to this other point. You can say, the fern, make the leaves blow in the wind. Animate it, and stuff like that. So that's what Composer does for us. So Unity does the job of the C and assembly language. It does have some SCI type stuff on there, but it's at a deep enough, detailed enough level that it's really good for games like action games, platformers, stuff like that, where it's all about action, it's all about the visuals. But this game is about 90% about the text, and the vast amounts of tens of thousands of lines that we have in the game, would not show up there. I'm going to do a little screen share here, which hopefully will work.
Okay.
This is a page of one of the Composer scripts. So we have, for instance, you can talk. This is on day 3. You talk to your roommate Aeolus and say, "What's new?" Now you can see it says if script is not tagged with 3 ask Aeolus used. So if you had already talked to Aeolus about something, then that would say, don't put this in the menu. So then we have some dialogue in there, and he says some things, and then we have a menu. And the menu says you have a choice of be polite, using your charm, answer evasively using your smarts, or be snarky using your moxie. And all those, again, check a tag to make sure that once you've chosen one of those, you can't choose any of the others. So in any one run through the game, you will not be exhaustively going down the list the way you did in the later Quest for Glories or in a LucasArts thing so you can get every clever line of dialogue. You will actually be making decisions. What am I going to do this time around? And once you made the decision, that's it for that conversation. So in this case, if you're polite, it says check if your charm is at least 18. If your charm is 18, then it adds 1 reputation point to Aeolus. And whether or not it does that, Aeolus says, or it gives Sean's line that says, Sophia will probably be very flattered that you wrote it for her. Now, it's a nice non-committal line. You're being polite without saying, well, you're kind of an idiot for even trying this. But, that was so all the scripts are like this. We have all these different conditions and tags. So I'm scrolling up and down this. This is one conversation with one person on one day of the game in that script. It's just there's just a vast amount of stuff. underneath I liken this game to an iceberg. You're going to see the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much under there. And then on the Unity level, our programmers are doing all kinds of stuff with pathing and so on. That Sierra did not do a very good job of walking around objects, which is why you pretty much always use the arrow keys and kind of had to maneuver your own way. Unity, being smart about 3D stuff, does that for you. So Unity gives us a lot of advantages. It unfortunately has a vast amount of power that is really too much for us, and so we have to build this layer on top of it in order to do things. And Composer, in turn, Composer is really good at doing messages and conditions and stuff like that. It's not good at doing animation, sound effects, music. All that we hand off to the Unity code. So we're really going back and forth in a hybrid, and it's just a gigantic undertaking.
You using Unity? Are you moving forward to the new version of Unity that's coming out? I'm sure there'll be a few people asking if you guys are moving forward to Unity 5 or not, or sticking with the one that you have right now.
I read a great book a long time ago, The Soul of a New Machine. I think it was Tracy Kidder or something like that, and it talked about why IBM was successful back in the 60s. And the reason is that they were always at least 2 years behind the curve. Whatever technology they decided to use at the start of the technology, and they were conservative even with that, they stuck with throughout the project. And otherwise, you can find yourself chasing your own tail because, especially with a project like this that's gone 2.5 years, it's got another year to go. If we chased our tail the whole time there, we would never finish it all. So currently, we're on Unity version 4.6. We probably will not upgrade to Unity 5 for this game. I expect that the moment it's out, when we start working the next game, that we'll probably upgrade everybody to Unity 5 or whatever this current version at that point. But by being a little conservative in the technology, we can focus on the the aesthetics and the gameplay.
Makes sense to focus on what you have there, especially given you've brought in people to help translate it into Unity. There. So with the Kickstarter, you're coming back. This is the second time you've been there. You were back in 2012 asking for 400,000. You got just over that, 409,000. What's happened with that? And at that time, you'd said October release and for the next year, and we're here 2 years later. So what happened with that, and what's changed since then?
Well, I did that Kickstarter on the model of the most successful Kickstarter ever, which had happened about 6 months earlier, which was Double Fine Adventure and Tim Schafer. I know Tim; he's a great guy, and he did exactly the same thing. He asked for 400,000, except that he allocated 100,000 of that for two-player productions to do a video of the process of making a game. Now, he did not actually promise a game in his Kickstarter. He promised to attempt to make a game, and that people would either see a small game made or they would see a glorious failure. Great line, I thought. What actually happened, and what he intended to do there, was use an off-the-shelf engine like AGS, Adventure Game Studio, and build a very small adventure game that would be basically like interactive fiction. Would not have a whole lot to it. And so he said, "I'll have this done in less than a year, and it'll cost 300,000 for our part of it, minus all the fees and stuff and all the rewards." And as we know, what happened with that is that project blew up. He got 87,000 backers and $3.3 million. And he said, "Okay, now what am I going to do? I can't make that small game anymore because I promised that all the money from this campaign is going to the game. And that means that now we have to make a full-scale adventure game." As we know, that it actually took about 3 years until the game was finally finished. 2 years in, he released part 1 of the game. And he had to do that because they had run through their entire $3.3 million and they needed additional funding, and that by completing part 1, they had something they could sell. They also cannibalized some of their other projects. They had other games that they had done for other publishers, and they took funds out of that in order to do it. So I don't know what the final budget for Broken Age was, but I would guess somewhere in the $5 to $6 million range. So it really ballooned. Now, does that mean that Tim is a terrible project planner and that he made a lot of mistakes? Yeah, he probably made a few. But what it really means is that when you start doing a full-scale adventure game, it's a really big project. It's inherently difficult to plan, and and it's very expensive, and that the 3.3 million that sounded so amazingly spectacular at the beginning, was enough to get close, but not enough to finish. So what would have happened if Tim had only gotten the 400,000? He would have probably made a little interactive fiction game with a few illustrations here and there, and it would be like a prototype for a game. It would be kind of like the demo that we've released, but with probably 8 or 10 rooms instead of 1 room. The full-scale adventure games Sierra style are really major projects, and in fact, I've often said that's why I think that the adventure game genre kind of went away for the most part at the end of the 1990s, and that first-person shooters and other action games took over. Our games at Sierra required an individual painting for every single scene. They required dozens or hundreds of characters, usually dozens, I guess, and a whole bunch of animation for everyone. Particularly the lead character typically had 100 or more animations. A lot of music, a lot of sound effects. These are gigantic projects. And as the world, as the graphics got more sophisticated, when we started Sierra, we were using 4-bit graphics, 16-color graphics, and the resolution was really low. And so artists drew the stuff on the screen. It looked very symbolic. It didn't really look like real art. And for the time, it was great. Compared to a screen full of text, it was awesome. But if you look back at those games, we kind of cringe. And then within 1 year after we got to Sierra, they started doing the VGA games with 256 colors, and now all of a sudden all the backgrounds were painted and scanned in with the camera, and the animation was just 10 times as difficult, going to 256 colors. Well, actually, 64 colors for the characters instead of 16. It's just much more difficult, much more complex. So our typical game, I go back to like Quest for Glory 3 was released in 1992. It was a 256-color game. It had a $600,000 budget. In today's dollars, that's $1 million. And by the time we were up to Quest for Glory 5, and Sierra was doing their very first dipping the toe into 3D graphics, and the graphics weren't very good. They were not ready for our games at the time. But that had $2 million starting budget. The actual game cost $4.5 million by the time it shipped, and that's about, I think, what, $6 or $7 million in today's dollars. So those games are incredibly expensive. So going back to us, we did a $400,000 budget, and that was not ever what we expected to make the game for. We could do a game. You see games for like $35,000. What a $35,000 budget means in a game is that nobody, including the developers, is being paid, and basically they're doing it as a hobby project, and and they may be very good, maybe very good quality hobby project, but it's it's designed to be doing something they're doing on the side and supporting it some other way. With a $400,000 project, we asked that amount because that was the most that we possibly thought we could get. My son, in fact, thought we should be asking $300,000, and as the Kickstarter project went on, we really didn't think we were going to make $400,000, and we really said, he was right. We should ask for $300,000, and that was a great starting funding for the project. It was good for more than a year of development, and we got really far into it. And at that point, we intended to use venture capital. Then we found out how much the venture capitalists take from a project. And it basically, it would have come out to essentially 100% of the return from the game, unless it sold a huge number of copies. And we said, maybe not. Now, if I had the crystal ball, I might have taken their money. But yeah, we had starter money. Along the way, we've had a lot of challenges in the project, but that's nothing unusual. Every single project has challenges. Every game at Sierra had something crazy go totally wrong with it. Like Quest for Glory 2, we were the last 16-color game entering the 256-color era, and we had a meeting with management to discuss whether we should start over and redo the game in 256 colors. And they decided that they didn't have any games coming out that year because everything was taking so long, and they needed a game out. So we were the sacrificial goat of the last game to be on old graphic standards, and it was reflected in the sales. It sold half as well as the first game. All 16-color games had no market whatsoever 15 minutes after the first 256-color game came out. So where did our $400,000 go? I've detailed it on a backers-only blog, and I'll be putting it into an open public blog on the new Kickstarter. But basically, $200,000 has gone to art. Close to $100,000 went to programming. About $50,000 went to rewards. About $50,000 went to Kickstarter fees, and like $30,000 to music, and there are a few other expenses. The total adds up to $435,000, which is what we got from the Kickstarter after people that backed and then didn't follow through on their pledges was a little under 400, and we've raised about 35,000 more from other sources. So, that's the money we've spent so far. And if you look at that, it sounds like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Where did it all go? And the answer is we're using professional talent. Lori and I have actually not paid ourselves at all. If we were paying ourselves, I was making $110,000 a year 10 years ago. So if we were paying ourselves at all, we'd probably pay ourselves $35,000 or $50,000 a year each, a token amount, and we don't even have the money to do that. Our outside developers, if you look at a programmer at any of the game companies, they're pulling in $100,000 a year or more. So that entire Kickstarter budget would have paid for basically one programmer, 2 artists, and a musician for 1 year. So it sounds like a huge amount. By the standards of what these games really take to develop, it's not that much. Is that far more than you wanted?
Yeah, no. If it's I'll probably include the full breakdown there, so in the article, so people can see it there. And looking at what you did provide there in the blog, you also said that about half the amount that you guys got in the spent in programming was proved to be unusable because of the switchovers of staff that you guys had having. And I don't know, there's no number on the art, but I imagine given your numerous styles and art shift early on, you probably lost a good portion of that too. Going from the 2D to
not really. Most of the art is usable. The part we lost was about $10,000 or $20,000 worth of 2D animation costs. We had a professional 2D animator who had worked on Disney films and Don Bluth films and so on. Absolutely awesome. And he did some animation for us. And then about 2 months into that, he got an offer he couldn't refuse from Electronic Arts Canada, and we couldn't match a $50 an hour salary for him. Our people were taking way less than that. Actually, I think I have $80,000 in that budget as our total programming costs, and anybody looking at that will quickly realize that's a ridiculously low number. The reason it's ridiculously low is because 2 of our principal programmers in late 2013 independently came up to me and said, you know what, I'd like a royalty in the game, and how about if I defer all of my salary until after the game ships? And we said, yeah, awesome, let's do that. And they were thrilled to be able to get a royalty, and we were thrilled to have no immediate costs for them. But yeah, our programmers are top pros. Unfortunately we've lost various programmers for various reasons. The one who started out the campaign, we were basically able to offer him, we could pay him half time at his normal rate, and that would have still taken out the $100,000 for the first year, and he got a full-time contracting gig at even higher than that, and he has a family to support. So what can we say? He had to leave, and he was really behind the project, but just couldn't afford to work for us. Now, I also want to emphasize this is not unusual. I have talked to developers of pretty much all the people that we worked with at Sierra that have come back and done Kickstarter, and I've talked to several other people that do adventure games, and I'm hearing things like one major, very popular indie adventure game designer. For him, a big budget is $25,000 to $30,000 for an entire game, and he does that because he doesn't hire anyone. It's just himself and his wife working in the games, and he doesn't actually pay himself. So that's basically just his expenses for that time, and then he hopes to sell enough copies to make a profit. But I've heard from all the people that did Kickstarters, and every single one of them, I have confidences, so I can't really give too many details, but every single one of them has gone massively over budget, and they've either gone to a publisher to take up the project as a publishing project, and or they've taken money out of their own pockets and dug very, very deeply into their own projects, and they're all worried. They're worried that they're not sure whether when these games actually launch, if they'll be able to get enough sales to be able to pay back all that money they've put out on them. So it is really, really tough to do these games. They are $1 million games. As I mentioned, Quest for Glory 3, that was 92. By Quest for Glory 4, we had $1 million budget then, which is, I guess, was $750,000 in the first version, which was released 3 to 6 months before it was done. The game was incredibly buggy, and that's $1.2 million in current terms. They spent another $250,000 over the following year to add voice acting, and one programmer worked full-time for a year just to fix all the bugs that were in the first release. So, these games, every year the cost of making them goes up. Unity has helped a lot. That we can get some things from the Unity Asset Store. Obviously, we don't want to look like every other game out there, so we're not using too much of that. But, a chair is a chair. For the most part, a box is a box, and so we're able to use some off-the-shelf assets. But most of our art is custom for this game, and custom art, it was $85,000 just for basic character animation or 3D characters. So these things add up for a professional level game, and this is a pro level Sierra quality game that we're making, and more complicated than Quest for Glory 4.
And probably going to be better looking than Quest for Glory 5, given the early state of 3D art at that time.
Yeah, so I cringe when I see Quest for Glory 5 art, or a lot of it, and this one I'm just so proud of, and it's just gorgeous.
And speaking about the loans and such, that you guys have said that you've put your house on the line basically to help support yourselves and help fund the project over the last year, essentially since last October. That's when you guys announced that on the what was it there? The Kickstarter update. You said that, so I take it that you guys are probably worried about that, especially not knowing how well it will sell, given that a lot of people who are interested in it have already basically pre-bought the game.
Well, we think the people that, and this is one of the reasons we're coming back with a Kickstarter right now, we think that the people that supported us in October, November 2012, we're true fans, really awesome people, and they're absolutely amazing because we basically said, okay, we've got this idea for a game, and we've got the very beginnings of a storyline. We showed some art that was pretty primitive and some cute little drawings, and said, well, somehow we're going to make a game that you're going to love. And these guys still came and backed us for $400,000. Absolutely amazing. Now we're 2.5 years into the project. We've gone slowly because we've been spending as little as we can. But we have some really amazing art that's been done for it. We have almost the entire castle has been done in 2D, and most of it converted to 3D. We've got all the characters and so on. We actually have stuff we can show now. Now we're going to an audience that will say, what have you got for us? And we can say, okay, here's what this game is going to really look like. And we've got actual playable sections. The game will be releasing little video clips. There's a slight teaser of it in the 2.5-minute Kickstarter video, but we can release some actual gameplay clips as we're going through some of these dialogues and stuff. And it's just really amazing looking, and it's going to be a really great game. And we think we're going to give you a really good story and really good character development in it. So that's why we're coming back to Kickstarter now rather than going to a venture capitalist. Is besides not wanting to give away the rest of our house to the venture capitalists, is we want people to see how great this game is looking now, and to find a new audience of people that maybe were not quite as big a risk taker to come in on an early, a pre-development project back in 2012. I will say my time estimate for the original project was completely off, but it was also based on factors that we didn't know. And one of them was just that we were going to do a much simpler game using the original developer. Once he left the team, he offered to let us use his code, which was really incredible of him, but we couldn't use it. New people coming in could not figure out how to turn that into the game we wanted. That alone stretched out the game at least a year, and frankly, I should have estimated 2 years to start with. So this really is a 3-year project. We've had at least a half a year wasted by false turns, but all that extra time has given us more time to write dialogue and refine ideas and do it. So make the art better. So spreading this out over a long period is really beneficial for the game. It's making a better game. But I'm a little sorry that I was, so ridiculously optimistic the first time and promised things that we never could have delivered. But we'll definitely deliver on what we're doing this time because now that we're this far in the project, we've got all the technology worked out. We've got the art done. It's just a matter of finishing the writing, getting it all programmed in, doing any enhancements, putting in the sound effects and any special animation, so on, and we'll build it up in layers. And that was this is Sierra philosophy: is you build the basic game, and then you say, okay, have we hit our deadline yet? No, got a little more time. Okay, add another layer on, make it that much more polished, more sophisticated. So at this point, we know what we're doing. We didn't know what we were doing 2.5 years ago, and we have a really awesome team right now. And this Kickstarter allows us to keep paying them. And not to run out, not have to run up credit card debt and stuff like that in addition to the home debt. So yeah, we've risked a lot for this, but we're really proud of what we're doing in the game, and we think it's worth it.
With the dialogue system you guys showed there, one thing I did notice is that it seems that the dialogue functions closer to something like the dialogue wheel that seems to be a relatively recent occurrence in many cases. Rather than the more older style, as in you don't select the whole line of dialogue, you select the type of tone and general feel rather than the actual line itself. Is that accurate, or am I misreading the code that's there, that you had there?
Our original games for the Quest for Glory series, we did something of trying to eliminate the massive guess the parser game of what do you type, and go to a system that was pretty much ask about, tell about system, that allowed you to point and click to the ask about and think about what words you wanted to talk about. And that works for that kind of game. But this one we really wanted to take to the next level. And Monkey Island did a nice job with it and giving you bits of what they said. And more modern games give you even smaller snippets of what you're saying. It's hard to tell the tone or judge. You think you're going to say one thing, and suddenly they're saying something that's totally off. Oh no, I didn't mean to say that. And so what we're trying to do is to come up with a balance between that and let you get a tone that you're trying to set and the concept you're trying to set, and just give you more of a subject. So it isn't going to say, oh, I want to say this, and it gives you the whole line, and then it goes in and says, oh, I'm saying this. You've already told them what you want to say, You don't have to repeat it. And likewise, this makes it a little more interesting because, okay, I want to be snarky here, but what is he actually going to say becomes the reward for your choosing of that thing, So now you get to see it, and at least you knew when you were going to start out that you were trying to be charming, and so rather than, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to say that thing.
And I should say these things don't happen overnight. They're design decisions, and that's one of the reasons that we don't try to design the game up front and get the entire thing done, because you get a much more fluid game and a much more fun to play if you refine things as you go along and bend with the wind as you're designing. So in this case, we tried the full lines and said, no, that's boring. You get to see the same thing twice. We tried the little subset in the line, and we remembered from games like Star Wars: The Old Republic that we always get angry in the game because they implied you were going to say one thing and you ended up saying something entirely different. And so we came up with the idea of having a little subset of the line and then putting the skill that's used in parentheses. This way we have a mixture of the the suspension of disbelief thing where you're actually having a conversation, along with the game mechanic where you know exactly, am I using my smarts or my charm or my snark or something else in this. And we have it for other menus as well. You can take an action and we can put in parentheses agility. And now you know that you have to have a good agility to pull off the thing you're trying to try. and that gives the player a little bit of a feel, so he's not completely surprised and annoyed when he was intending to smile and be charming, and the game instead required his character to be really agile and jump over a pit of fire. We don't want to do that to players.
I think actually Knights of the Old Republic had that all spelled out. It was Mass Effect that really debuted the dialogue wheel there, and they have iterated on it to add something like that, though facial expressions are a little difficult to tell at times for me being colorblind on those. Speaking about the launch process for the game, you've mentioned that you want to have a beta in late 2015. Do you plan on releasing that as early access on Steam? You've mentioned in the past that might be a possibility that you were looking at to raise additional funds.
Well, I do plan to go up on Steam Greenlight, and we've only looked into it vaguely. I haven't actually looked at what the requirements are, but originally we didn't even think about Greenlight because it was really hard to get a project through Greenlight, and because we were working with a developer who already had 2 games on Steam, we got fast-track permission to bypass it. Now that Greenlight is more of a promotional tool for getting people to see your game rather than a barrier to cross, we definitely want to use that so that more people will see it, and we'll be sharing that with the Kickstarter backers, of course, to try and get some of them to help us get greenlighted. Early access, though, no, I don't think so. We talked about, one of the things was, do we want to do what Broken Age did and give you half the game as a part 1? And frankly, I think that would be a disservice to this game. The story, everything ties in the whole. We'll have to write at least 90% of the game before we would be able to release 50% of it. So having gone that far, why not finish the game and get it all out? We are planning on talking with some of our beta testers and saying, hey, do you want to test a particular area? And we'll get a certain number of beta testers to do that, and then we will give them instructions for how to get to a particular stage of the game, and so they can exhaustively test one part of the game. Because just playing through the game over and over again, first of all, is boring. Second of all, ruins the experience for those players because they'll have to play it in beta form instead of the final form. And third, tends to miss a lot of stuff. We're going to see if we can get that really deal. I mean, that's the way things were done at Sierra. One day I came in, the proudest game moment I ever had was working on Castle of Dr. Brain. I had finally gotten a game that I had so much control over it, and the team had done such a great job that I went into QA with a bug-free game, and we were going to just romp through QA and ship it. And so QA worked on it for a week, and they came back with an inch-thick stack of paper. It was more than 50 bugs. And I said, oh, my God, 50 bugs. I thought this game was clean. And the QAer looked at me and laughed and said, come here, I want to show you something. And he took me into the QA room, and there they had a file cabinet. And on top of the filing cabinet was a stack of papers 3.5 feet tall, went almost up to the ceiling. And he said, that's the current bug release for a game I won't mention yet. That's one of our other games we've been QAing, and that's the bug set. The fact that we only found 50 bugs in Castle of Dr. Brain means that this is the cleanest game that has ever come into QA. But there's no game that is entirely clean. And Quest for Glory, would have had more like a foot-tall stack of bugs because when you've got games this complicated, there are problems. A lot of the bugs aren't really bugs. They're okay. This character's foot was clipped a little when he walked around this. Doesn't look good. And we have to do a certain amount of triage. We have to say, okay, is that important enough to fix, or are we just not going to worry about it? And stuff like that we'll probably leave in. But the ones that say, okay, and in fact, in pretty late phases of the demo, before we released the demo, I had things where you clicked on the candle holder by the door, and we had forgotten to click the checkbox that added a done option to the menu, and there was no way out of that menu. And so if you did that, the game was locked up and it was over. Said, I don't think we want to ship with this one. And that, by the way, is an intentional feature because some of the dialogue, if you're in a classroom situation and they're asking you questions, we don't want you to be able to escape out of the dialogue. We might have an option that says, don't answer. but you're going to have to choose that option. You don't get to get away with just clicking escape everywhere and ignoring the questions, because that doesn't develop your character personality.
How are you guys planning to handle the classroom stuff? That seems like something that not a lot of games really go into outside of much more simulation-based. So how are you planning to engage people in the classroom?
Well, you basically, with most of the classroom situations, we presume you come in the middle of the class. You come here at the end of the class, and the lecture's already been given by the teachers. And so you just have a moment of interaction, like a question or a brief thing of what was discussed in that class. So it becomes like a synopsis of what it is, so that you didn't have a boring lecture. But then you have an interaction with your classmates or a questionnaire about it, and there's a lot of questionings in this game, a lot of tests and quizzes about things. You really do have to pay attention to what you're taught in these things. And some of these classes are, you have to go to your main class, your rogue class, because that gives you your skills to actually do rogue things. But you can also take electives. You can take a science elective or a magic class elective or a healing class elective, first aid class, and these will give you additional skills. But if you choose to skip that day and do what every student in every school has ever done and take a day off, so to speak, that's fine. But you may lose a skill. You may not get a special thing like, in science class, you may make a bomb that day. Well, guess what? That's one day of bomb you did not get. But it's a decision-making process. And so that the classrooms are actually, all of the classes are either an opportunity to get to know your friends better, or to get to know a new skill, or to improve a skill, or to get a new item to add to your collection of things that you get to work with. So classes are more an opportunity than they are a dull lecture or anything like reality, because nobody really wants to relive the good days of school lectures and teachers giving you stupid quizzes.
There's also a area expertise here. Contrary to popular belief, Lori and I are not professional rogues. And so if we were to give you the entire rogue lecture, we'd probably get a lot of it wrong. I did buy a lockpick set once. I'm absolutely appalling at actually picking a lock. I've tried it. It's hard. So we give you the good parts version. We took a screenwriting course once from Robert McKee, awesome class. And one of his points is you never enter a scene at the beginning. You always come into the middle of a scene and hopefully leave in the middle of the scene. Because that way, there's actual drama and actual tension. So the rogue class, we give you the good parts version of the class, except that there are pop quizzes, and a lot of the questions and quizzes have not actually been covered in class, so the player will have to figure out how to answer them.
In a lot of cases, they're almost a logic problem of trying to figure out, well, what is this question really asking? Because you've got a teacher who is an honest rogue, and therefore he's sneaky, devious, and you'd better be paying attention when he asks you a question.
Yeah, so you get to figure out what answer does the teacher want, which is what most of us did on tests back in school, and sometimes that backfires because your instructor is devious enough that he knows when you're bullshitting him. So if you basically try to give him a smarmy, this is what the teacher wants answer, he may put you down for it and say, well, yes, that's probably what you think I want to hear, but no, that's not an honest answer coming from you. Get some demerits. If you get 100 demerits, we kick you out of the school. That's one of the ways to die.
So one question I did have is that a lot of people who are playing these days have never played Quest for Glory because of its age, and it hasn't necessarily been updated, especially the earlier ones. To those people, how would you describe the series to them if they were wanting to look at it?
It's, well, the way we once described it was out of a Saturday Night Live skit, which is, it's a dessert topping and a floor wax. So to us, what we're doing here is we're bringing the tabletop role-playing experience to the computer. We're doing a simulation that is an adventure game and that it has a lot of story. Puzzles, we don't really have the really tricky, tough puzzles of adventure games. Some of these are famous for being completely unsolvable. One of the rules that we always gave to our Quest for Glory games is that everything had to make sense within the context of the game world and what you had done in the game. There was, we had a lot of cool Easter eggs based on outside knowledge, but those are not important to the game. Everything that was important to the game was stuff that was logical, made sense, and fit into the game. So this is the same thing where you are more going through the experience of being a young man from a poor family out on the streets and then suddenly brought into this school for heroes and trying to make your way when everybody else there seems more qualified or richer or whatever. Trying to make friends in a new environment, trying to succeed, and you get to try to become Rogue of the Year, but you have to do great deeds to do that. You've got a lot of choices to make and a lot of choices of where to spend your time and so on. And you won't necessarily get it right in the first playthrough. You may get through the game and either die or let me get back to death in a second, though. It's a little different from a Quest for Glory in that. Or just not succeed very well. You may not make any friends by the end of the school year. You might not become Rogue of the Year. So then you'll go back and replay the game using what you've learned to try and do better. We are also a role-playing game, very much like a traditional RPG, in that you get to go down into the dungeons and find monsters and avoid traps and set your own traps. You get to use all your rogue skills to sneak around and try to solve combat in tricky ways rather than sit there and fight it. We'll later have a game featuring a fighter. It'll be more straightforward combat. And this one, you're not the greatest fighter in the world. You're a hero, but you're not that kind of a hero, and so you've really got to work at it. So we have basically a storytelling game with a lot of character interaction, and part of the storytelling is the action sequences of going down and exploring deep, dank, abandoned areas of the castle and finding out what's down there and fighting things and finding cool stuff. So that's kind of what the game is, but it's it's a simulation, it's an adventure, it's an RPG, it's a turn-based strategy game. A little bit of everything.
But the key thing is it's a lot of fun. That's the rule number one with all our decision making. Is this going to be fun? You have a choice of things to do, and you get to make your own decisions with it, but everything has to have a reasonable outcome and it has to follow suit. You can't just shoehorn everything back together and tie it all up in a bow, or you've got a standard adventure game, really. In a lot of cases, yes, you're going to wind up coming back to the same places, but the reactions and the interactions there, because of what you've done in the course of the game, will be very different, and your end will depend on how you're beginning and how you played the middle.
Yeah, we're also a little bit like a play. In a play, you've got scenes, and you may have several scenes that take place in the same location, someone's office or a bedroom or something like that. But the dialogue is different every time because it's a different scene. And so you'll be going back to your bedroom every day of this game, and we have, 50-some unique dialogue trees for every day that you go back there almost. It's actually about 40, I think. A few of them go over a couple days, but almost every day you get something new. And so the storytelling in there. But I did leave, when Lori mentioned fun, I did leave out that kind of everything is logical and makes sense and furthers this dramatic storyline, except when it doesn't. And when it doesn't is that we have a kind of a reputation to maintain, which is I'm an incorrigible punster, and that we have a lot of, when you're looking at objects and dealing with things that are not directly relevant to the storyline, we have cute, funny messages. And I try to make them relevant, but at the same time, if we can come up with a wordplay, I use it. So part of the fun of this is the discovery aspect of going through and just trying stuff all over the game and seeing what completely ridiculous things you can do. One of the very first interactive fiction games, Adventure in Zork. In Zork, they had a magic word called foobar. and you could type in foobar, and if you did it in a place where it wasn't a relevant keyword, instead of doing something magical, it said foobar and bletch to you. And that was funny only in the context of at MIT at that time. All the students were kind of, of course, foobar goes back to World War II, or World War I even, and is an acronym for something. But those were kind of, people would use those words for silliness. And when people played those games back in the 60s, or the late 60s, early 70s, they were absolutely amazed that they would type in something completely ridiculous and have the game respond to them. If they would type in a curse word, the game might say, "Did your mother teach you to talk like that?" And this was a huge surprise to players because it made them think they were talking to a real person. Well, we can't quite make you think you're talking to a real person, but we can get some of that silliness across. And we try not to let it spoil the drama of the story, but it is, as I say, kind of a trademark, and we want people to have fun with the game. So it's it's not all darkness and seriousness and grim. There's a lot of fun to it.
And you've got interesting characters you're interacting with. The whole school is filled with very different personalities, and so some of those characters are pretty humorous in and of themselves and their interactions. Like your roommate is always falling in love with somebody, and then he's either fabulously in love or totally depressed afterwards, and you have to interact with him or not, and comfort him or help him with his love of his life or not. And you get into very amusing situations with those characters as well. So part of this is a story told in dialogue like a good play, and that you have to figure out who you're going to talk to, which gives you that side of the story, and eventually the whole thing comes together in the end.
So on a bit of a different note, Quest for Glory was noted for having different playstyles and options depending on which class you were in. The Rogue had a lot of different options to say the Wizard or the Fighter. Now, with Hero U as a series, you're planning on focusing on just one character each time. And for Road to Redemption, obviously, that's the Road. How are you planning to capture a similar feeling of allowing players to have different solutions based on what skills and solutions they've gotten?
Well, for one thing, everybody thought we were absolutely insane to put that in a game back in the 1990s, and we probably were. So the compromises you make by handling all the different character types and having different solutions and story elements for each one is it affects the writing. There's only a certain amount you can do for each one. So this one, Laurie is really able to drill down into the characters, and we've got a real personality for your main character. We had, kind of the hero with no name was your character in Quest for Glory, and that's pretty cool. Some really good films have been done that way. But even so, if you went to like the spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood, the hero with no name had a particular backstory, and it affected the way he acted in it. So we're able to get much more characterization in.
And there are multiple ways of solving the problems. That's the real thing that Quest for Glory did, is that it presented you with the same kind of puzzle, like where is the ring hiding that this woman has lost, and then when you find it, it's outside in a tree in a bird's nest, well, a pterodactyl, baby pterodactyl creatures kind of things, nest, and the puzzle was how do you get it out of the tree? And in Quest for Glory, if you were the rogue, you could climb the tree, or you could possibly throw a rock at the tree, at the nest, and knock it down. There were different skills that you could use. The magic user used a spell. Well, in this game, there are multiple ways to do things. Like, for instance, if player wants, this rogue could have magical skills. A few, not like a magic user. He won't be a real combination, but he'll have augmented skills that help him find secret doors or find different areas in the game that he wouldn't necessarily know to look for. And so there are alternate ways to solve problems, and it just depends on how you're going to play. And this is really true when it comes down to combat, because it's, you can be a really effective thief or fighter in this game, once you get near the end of the game and you've gotten super daggers and you've gotten your leather armor and you've got your magic thief stuff and you're dressed to the nines in this rogue costume, which, unlike Quest for Glory, this time you actually have equipment that affects your stats and that, and so therefore you'll be able to buy things or attain things that will really make you a dandy fighter. And if that's the way you want to solve the boss monsters in the game, by actually having serious combat, yeah, you can. Or if you choose not to, you might avoid them altogether, or you might have a whole collection of traps and bombs and magic items that will create, magical spells, and you can just simply set your whole scene before you engage your monster and then turn them loose and then watch the monster run over one bomb and then go get caught in another thing. And you can play the game as a puzzle and with all these tools that you have at your disposal to solve the problem.
With, of course, you're either putting in time to make those bombs or spending a lot of money on them, so that you have to decide, is it worth it to go through that. One of the things Quest for Glory lacked is, it was a role-playing game. We had very little in the way of equipment. We were pretty much limited to Sierra's inventory system, so you couldn't, acquire a huge variety of things. This one we have far more options in equipment, and they, we have the paper doll style, being able to, equip your character with better armor and so on. In our case, now the word role-playing game, coming from a tabletop background, we don't think of it exactly the same way as, say, an Ultima computer role-playing game. To us, there should be some role-playing in a role-playing game. So when you get a new suit of armor, it may protect you better, but it may also increase your charm. And your charm will help you to get favors from characters and teachers in the school. So basically, you're wearing nicer clothing, and that makes a difference. So frequently, many of the the magic items in here have nothing to do with combat. One of the things in MMOs is you're constantly upgrading all your equipment, trying to get that tiny little stat increase. We don't have that wide a variety of equipment because that's just overkill. Oh, I was going to say something about that. But that kind of becomes the game. And in this one, things are more relevant. There's a certain number of them, and that's it's kind of thing. Oh, I was going to say. So the reason is, why do you upgrade your equipment in an MMO? Well, the reason is because you're probably in a guild that has a raid group, and you go into the raids, and if your equipment isn't good enough, you won't be able to defeat the boss monsters, and then they'll kick you out of the raid. So you want to upgrade your things. And well, why do you want to defeat that boss monster? Because when you defeat the boss monster, you have a chance of getting a really nifty piece of equipment. And that'll upgrade your skills more so you can defeat the next one. And it's just this endless grind trying to get better and better equipment. So in this game, you can avoid almost all the combat. And if you do, the consequences will be you won't improve your combat skills very much. You won't improve your agility. You won't improve your combat, your defense. And you won't get as much money. And you won't get as much combat equipment. But that's okay, because what do you need that combat equipment for? You need it for more combats. And if you've decided to play this as a non-combat game, you can do that by pretty much avoiding every monster, sneaking around them, using traps to slow them down and stuff. And you'll be playing this as strictly an adventure game. And you'll be much poorer, but you won't care about the money, you won't care about the equipment, because that's not what you're playing it for. So if your play style is to play this as an RPG, you'll want to go through and really minimax those combats and do a great job of it, and and get the awesome treasures. It makes you feel get that reward. And if you're strictly want to play it as a sneaky stealth game, you don't have to do those fights. You won't get all the stuff, but you don't need it. And so it's really and that's going to be another one of the things that's going to be really hard for us to balance, but it mostly works out. By basically not gating things from the bosses, not forcing you to go through a boss to get to the next section of the game, means you can avoid combat entirely.
So I did get the chance yesterday to play through both of the demos actually on stream with some of the people. One of the things I noticed from some of the commentary was the running animation with Sean right now in the combat demo might need a little bit of work according to some of the people. It looked a little bit weird. Is that animation locked in, or is that still one of the, because you've mentioned that one of the things you plan on working on still is doing finishing touches on animation?
We're definitely going to be working on that. Yeah, we got a certain amount of animation from Concept Art House that did all the characters for us, and they gave us basic running animation. But the thing is that the way, well, actually the way both 2D and 3D works, but especially 3D, is that you get certain motions in the animation, and then it's up to you as to how it's programmed. So the distance that you move with each step, the speed with which you go through the cells of the animation, so on, all affects how it looks. And we will be fine-tuning that. We do think the character, the walk speed right now is too slow, and we've already brought it up 40%. It's still too slow. So we want the character to walk a little faster. We want the run to be much faster. We'll possibly, at Quest for Glory, we had consequences for running. You tired yourself out if you ran all the time. I think that people are used to playing like World of Warcraft, where characters do nothing but running. So maybe we don't want to saddle the characters with a disadvantage for running all the time. But the environments here are quite large. You go through like the rogue class corridor of the hallway, and it's not a tiny little Sierra one-screen room. It's you're going through the equivalent of about 8 or 10 screens as you go through this thing, and so we will want the movement through that to be pretty reasonably fast, or it'll get tedious. So a lot of work to be done on that. That's a lot of the tuning we're going to be doing. So that's one of the things that that we're really happy with the 3D is that our camera is much closer in on the character than in most games out there, most adventure games, and certainly any strategy game or RPG. In those games, you've got a little tiny character off in the distance, so you can get a lot of context in the map because it's all about strategy. Whereas in this game, it's all about playing the role of Sean O'Connor. And so we've got the camera in as close as we can get it. We pull back a little bit for combat, so you get more context and you can do more tactics. But we've got some really nice character artwork, and you're close enough in to actually see it. And we've had people say, well, why can't we get graphics like Quest for Glory? And they're dealing with memory. You go back and play those games again and see that those characters are really blocky. They had very few colors. They don't really look that good. So we're getting to actually see the characters for the first time. Do you want to add anything, Lori?
Full time. Yeah. Part of the thing will be whether or not we have the Kickstarter succeeds, and that will determine how much more money we'll pour into fixing things like whether a walk cycle looks right. Because after all, what would you rather have, a funky walk or a whole section to the game? Because you could get used to certain things like, oh, he just hitches sometimes when he walks. But I'd sure like to see that Yog-Sothoth temple in the game. So everything's for us is a trade-off. And how much time do you put into getting things refined versus adding more stuff? It all comes down to how much time do you have left and who you have to do this stuff.
Speaking about that actually a little bit, you guys were away from the games industry for about 8 to 10 years. How do you think it's changed in that time? I mean, you've been back now for a couple of years and running around with that. So how did you find that it changed in that long gap there?
Yeah, it's always changed every year. We had every time we got comfortable making a game at Sierra, they pulled the rug out from under us and changed all the rules. So, for instance, our first game was Heroes Quest under the parser and 16-color interface. We used the same technology for the second game, but the process was completely different because they were working on starting the 256-color game. So now the teams were in different parts of the building, and all the artwork was done with painted and scanned in. It actually more than doubled the budget from the first game to the second game, just because of the process changes. By the third game, we were completely painted backgrounds, I mean real paint. And so on. Now we're actually, the funny thing is we've kind of gone full circle because now all of our artists are painting on the computer, and they're not actually doing stuff with real paint and then scanning in and so on. But now they're doing everything in full color. That we're not even restricted to the 256 colors, the VGA games, and the low resolution we had there. With Unity, I kind of did a self-imposed exile here that I decided early on at the project that I would not be a programmer in this one. I have my hands full between administration and writing, so I really haven't been. I'm doing scripting, but I'm not doing any of the actual Unity programming. So I have to rely very much on the team to do that. But the process changes every year. As far as the way the industry's gone, is we've had every year there's more consolidation. Companies go out of business or get acquired by other companies. Now we have a few very large companies making huge games that are expected. If they don't make $50 million in the game, they consider it a failure. The budgets of many of these games are in the $20 to $50 million range. If you look at Call of Duty, the budgets are at least $20 million for one of those games. And even for adventure games, people's expectations, they're expecting to be as good as the AAA games. And that's really... So we had a little window in there, I think, for about 3 years where indies could come in and make very simple independent games and find a market for it. Now we still have the indies, but now the quality standards have gone up where everyone expects the indies to make really great-looking games. And so we're trying to now come up to that quality level. It's really challenging. It's very, very difficult. But it's never been easy. The game industry has always been famous for massive crunch and massive overtime. And frankly, Laurie and I, for the last 2.5 years, have been in pretty much constant crunch mode. We're working 7 days a week, at least 6 every week. We often put in 15-hour days, and we also get time to play other games and have fun. So it's a mixture, but it never gets easy.
Laurie, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, as Corey said, it never gets easy. We weren't out of the game industry during that time. We had an online School for Heroes going all these years, and we were basically this was a quasi-game / reality show in which you were sort of playing a wizard, a thief, or a rogue, and you were writing about experiences in your real life that were part of it. So we kept in from that level. We were creating games all this time, and from another level, we were playing a variety of games that were out there, different kinds of games besides, our favorites. Well, my favorite is the, like World of Warcraft or Star Wars: The Old Republic, but also the smaller games, the games like Long Live the Queen and other kinds of genre games, which together, when you put it together, you create in your mind, how do these things tie together? What is it that I like to do in a game? And what I think is fun. And so those all come into when you're trying to write these games out. What was fun for me? What was the experience I enjoyed? How do I bring it into this kind of game? So it's really, part of the game design is all about what is fun and what do I want to do and what is the game I want to play. So that's what it's all about, is creating the best game experience that you can think of that you really want to do.
Yeah, we can't read anyone's minds and figure out what it is that they're looking for in a game and what will be fun for them. So all we can rely on is what would be fun for us. What do we think we would enjoy doing? And that's the experience we try to build into all of our games, is say, okay, we want to make a game that if somebody was handing this to us, we would enjoy playing through. And so far that formula has worked pretty well with Quest for Glory and Castle of Dr. Brain and others. And we're hoping it'll still work.
Plus, we have an advantage that we have for this game that we never had in the past, in that we have a team who is really self-selected. the people that are working on this game love this kind of game, are here because they were backers for our game in a lot of cases, or they really want to see this kind of game, and we get their opinions. They're as much a part of this team and the decisions and the style and the look as we are. And believe me, this has been a long path and a long meandering path to get to where we are today, but it really does come down to who was working on the game, what they thought was fun, what their feedback for us about what's working and what isn't. And the game is totally evolving as it goes along. So we will get more and more fan feedback into it too, and we'll balance it all out and try to come up with something that feels right for everybody, and without compromising, the values of what this game really is.
I'd like to thank you guys for coming here today and talking with me. It's been very interesting to listen to both of you. So I'd like to thank Corey Cole and Lori Cole. You can see their game, Hero U, up on Kickstarter right now. And they're, I believe, already over a third of the way there last time I looked, and it's moving really quickly for them right now. You can get to there at heroU.com/Kickstarter. Any last words for you two?
Well, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we love to talk about this stuff, and a lot of times it reminds us of what we've gone through to get here when we get to talk about it. So.
Yes, and we're really proud of the game. We really want to see people. We want to reach more people so that they can see what we're doing and experience this unique game series called Hero U.
Thank you again, and have a good day.